What happens when a lifetime of saving others turns into a desperate battle to save your own? A bulldozer roars, a community watches, and one woman's defiant stand goes viral. You won't believe the lengths she'll go to protect her rescued horses from corporate greed. Don't miss what happens next in this fight for survival. The crisp October air of outer Boston usually carried the scent of decaying leaves and the distant hum of city life. But this morning, a sharper, more acrid smell tainted the breeze. The metallic tang of officialdom, carried on the stiff paper of the notice Greg Davis slapped against Lucinda Evans's barn door. Final warning. Evans, this eyesore comes down. You've got 72 hours. Lucinda, her 55 years etched onto a face that had seen too much sun and sorrow, didn't flinch. Her hands, calloused from years of gripping reins and mucking stalls, clenched at her sides. This isn't an eyesore, Greg. It's a sanctuary. And these aren't just animals, they're survivors. Something you wouldn't understand. Greg Davis, a man whose tailored suit seemed out of place amidst the rustic charm of Lucinda's small acreage, scoffed. At 52, he was the self-appointed enforcer of the Chestnut Hill Homeowners Association, a body whose recent expansion had begun to encroach on the older, more established properties like Lucinda's. His face, usually arranged in an expression of smug superiority, tightened. Their livestock. Evans, and this operation violates at least a dozen HOA bylaws. Bylaws you're now subject to since the rezoning. We've been more than patient. Patience, Lucinda thought, was a strange word coming from a man who'd been hounding her for months. Ever since the invisible line of the HOA's jurisdiction had stretched to swallow her land. Her property, once a quiet haven on the city's fringe, was now prime real estate in their eyes. And her rescued horses, an unacceptable blight. She'd bought the land 15 years ago, a small patch of green where she could heal and help others do the same. After the relentless trauma of her work during Hurricane Katrina, pulling families from rooftops and comforting the dazed survivors amidst the devastation of New Orleans, she'd needed it. The screaming winds and rising waters had been replaced by the soft nickering of horses, each one a story of neglect or abuse, nursed back to health by her unwavering care. There was Samson, a once-starved gelding now gleaming with vitality. Delilah, a mare blinded in one eye by a cruel former owner, yet trusting and gentle. And Goliath, a towering draft horse saved from a slaughterhouse, his massive frame a testament to resilience. They were her family, her purpose. These bylaws didn't exist when I built this barn. Greg, when I started taking in animals nobody else wanted. Lucinda's voice was low but firm. This is their home, the only safe place most of them have ever known. Davis adjusted his silk tie, a gesture of dismissal. Progress, Ms. Evans. Boston is expanding. Property values are at stake. Your hobby is depressing those values. The HOA has voted. The demolition order is signed. He tapped the notice again. 72 hours. Or we'll remove them for you. And trust me, the livestock auction won't care about their stories. The threat, cold and clinical, hung in the air. Lucinda felt a familiar anger rise, the same protective fury that had driven her through chest-deep floodwaters. But this was a different kind of storm, one of bureaucratic maneuvering and cold-hearted greed. As Davis turned, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path, a young woman with a determined glint in her eye and a camera slung over her shoulder stepped forward. Phoebe, a 25-year-old freelance environmental reporter, had been documenting Lucinda's work for a local online journal, drawn to the quiet heroism of the horse rescue operation. She'd arrived just in time to witness the confrontation. "Mr. Davis," Phoebe called out, her voice clear and steady, "is the HOA really prepared to forcibly remove these animals, many of whom require specialized care? Knowing there's no other facility like this in the greater Boston area," Davis shot her a venomous look. "This is a private property matter, young lady, not some bleeding heart news story. The HOA acts within its legal rights." He didn't elaborate, striding towards his oversized SUV parked ostentatiously at the edge of Lucinda's driveway. Lucinda watched him go, a knot tightening in her stomach. 72 hours. It was an impossibly short timeline. How could she find new homes, safe homes, for a dozen traumatized horses in 3 days? The shelters were already overflowing, and the thought of them at an auction, terrified and confused, their fates sealed by the highest bidder, was unbearable. Phoebe turned to Lucinda, her expression a mixture of outrage and concern. "What are you going to do now?" Lucinda looked towards the barn, where the soft whinnies of her horses greeted the morning. A lifetime ago, she'd faced down the raw power of nature to save lives. Now she faced a different, more insidious force, but the core of her being, Bao, the rescuer, the protector, remained unchanged. "I'm not going to let him win." "Phoebe," she said, a steely resolve hardening her gaze. "He wants a fight, he'll get one. This isn't just about bylaws and property values. This is about compassion. It's about what kind of community we want to be." She took a deep breath, the scent of hay and horse calming her frayed nerves. "He thinks this is just a barn. I need to show everyone it's a lifeline." The first calls she made were to her vet, then to a lawyer a friend had recommended, a specialist in property disputes. The initial consultations were sobering. The HOA, with its newly expanded territory, did seem to have a legal basis for its claims. However morally bankrupt, the rezoning had been pushed through quietly, and many, like Lucinda, were caught off guard by the implications. Her best hope, the lawyer suggested, was a temporary restraining order, but that would require proving imminent and irreparable harm, and time was a luxury she didn't have. As the first day bled into a tense evening, Lucinda walked through the barn, checking on each horse. She ran her hand down Samson's strong neck, whispered assurances to a skittish Delilah, and watched Goliath peacefully munching his hay. Each soft muzzle nudge, each trusting gaze, was a fresh stab of pain, a renewed vow to protect them. The thought of Greg Davis's cold eyes and the implied threat of the auction house fueled a cold rage within her. This was more than just land. It was a testament to survival, to the healing power of kindness, and she would not let it be bulldozed into oblivion. The second day dawned gray and oppressive, mirroring the weight on Lucinda's shoulders. Sleep had been a fleeting, restless thing, punctuated by nightmares of bulldozers and the terrified cries of her horses. The lawyer's call came mid-morning, confirming her worst fears. Lucinda. Mark Harrison's voice was sympathetic but firm over the phone. The judge denied the emergency injunction. The HOA's paperwork, on the surface, is airtight. They followed the procedural steps for the rezoning and the bylaw enforcement, without concrete proof of immediate, life-threatening danger to the horses beyond the emotional distress, which is hard to quantify legally in this context, or a clear procedural flaw we haven't found yet. The court won't intervene at this stage. Lucinda felt the ground beneath her sway. So that's it. They can just come in. Not quite just come in, Harrison clarified. They still have to follow eviction protocols, but the initial demolition order stands. Our best bet now is to build a stronger case for a permanent injunction, highlighting the unique nature of your rescue and the lack of alternative facilities. But that takes time, more time than 72 hours. For now, your strongest leverage might be public awareness. Can you rally support public awareness? The words echoed Phoebe's earlier sentiment. The young reporter had arrived shortly after sunrise, her camera ready, her determination undimmed. She'd spent the previous evening drafting an article, sending it to every local news outlet she had a contact for, big or small. Most of the bigger papers haven't responded, Phoebe admitted, her brow furrowed with frustration. They see it as a minor zoning dispute, but a couple of online community forums and a smaller local blog have shown interest. It's a start. A start. It felt like a very small shield against a very large battering ram. Later that morning, the first tangible sign of the HOA's intent arrived. A stark white van with Chestnut Hill HOA, Compliance division stenciled on its side parked just beyond Lucinda's fence line. Two men in crisp uniforms emerged. Not Davis, but men with the same air of detached officialdom. They began taking photographs of the barn, the fences, even the manure pile, their clipboards making officious ticking sounds in the unnerving quiet. Lucinda stood by the paddock, Samson's warm breath ghosting her cheek as he nuzzled her for reassurance. The horses were restless, sensing the tension, their ears swiveling towards the unwelcome visitors. Delilah paced nervously in her stall, her blind eye turned towards the direction of the commotion. "They're just taking pictures." "Girl," Lucinda murmured, stroking Samson's neck, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. It felt like a violation, this cold assessment of her life's work, her sanctuary, as if it were nothing more than a checklist of violations. Phoebe, ever the journalist, was documenting the HOA's surveillance. Her camera lens a silent accuser. "This is intimidation. Plain and simple," she muttered to Lucinda, keeping her distance from the compliance officers but making her presence known. "They want you to break." The psychological toll was immense. Every passing hour felt like a grain of sand slipping through her fingers. Friends called, offering words of support, some even offering temporary foster spots for one or two of the smaller, healthier horses. But for Goliath, or the several others with complex medical needs or deep-seated behavioral trauma, uprooting them was a terrifying prospect. The stress of a move, new handlers, and an unfamiliar environment could set their recovery back months, if not permanently. That afternoon, Phoebe's small breakthrough materialized. The Boston Community Voice, a widely read local blog with a surprisingly active comments section, published her piece. It was titled "Sanctuary Under Siege, HOA Threatens Lifeline for Rescued Horses." The article was passionate, detailing Lucinda's history with Katrina, her dedication to the animals, and the unique role her rescue played. It included poignant photos Phoebe had taken over the past weeks, Lucinda gently coaxing a frightened new arrival, the visible transformation of horses once on the brink of death. Within hours, the comments section exploded. Many were supportive, expressing outrage at the HOA's actions. "This is heartless," one wrote. "Leave those horses alone," another demanded. But there was also a vocal contingent echoing Davis's sentiments. Rules are rules. Property values matter. If she can't afford to follow the bylaws, she shouldn't be there. The digital battle lines were being drawn, but the real-world clock was ticking with terrifying speed. Greg Davis himself made an appearance late in the afternoon. He didn't approach Lucinda directly this time, but stood with his compliance officers, his arms crossed, a smug look on his face as he surveyed her property. He saw Phoebe and her camera, and his expression soured. He clearly hadn't anticipated any media attention. However small, this is private property. "Miss Evans," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "And so is the access road. I'd advise your guest to be mindful of trespass laws." Phoebe didn't back down. "I'm on a public easement. Mr. Davis, documenting a matter of public interest." Davis merely sneered and turned back to his officers, giving them some unheard instructions before departing in his SUV. The subtle escalation was clear. He was feeling the pressure, however slight, from Phoebe's article and was now resorting to implied threats. As dusk settled, casting long, ominous shadows across the barn, Lucinda felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. Despair. The legal avenues seemed closed for the immediate future. The HOA was undeterred, and public support, while growing, felt intangible against the looming deadline. She had less than 24 hours left. Phoebe, sensing her despondency, put a hand on her arm. "Don't give up. Lucinda, that article is getting traction. People are sharing it. We just need to make it bigger. We need to make them see this isn't just about a barn." Lucinda looked at the young woman, her spirit a stark contrast to Lucinda's own weary soul. "How, Phoebe? How do we make them see when they're determined to be blind?" Phoebe's eyes lit up with a sudden idea. "Tomorrow morning, when they come, if they come with that bulldozer, We go live. We show the world exactly what's happening here. Not just pictures, not just an article. Real time. They want to bulldoze a horse sanctuary. Let them do it with everyone watching. The thought was terrifying. The raw, unfiltered exposure. But it was also, Lucinda realized, her last, most desperate gambit. If the law wouldn't protect them, perhaps the court of public opinion, armed with the undeniable truth of live video, would. The final morning arrived with an unnerving stillness. The usual chorus of bird songs seemed muted, the air heavy with anticipation. Lucinda had barely slept, her mind racing through every possible scenario, every horse's frightened whinny echoing in her ears. Phoebe arrived before dawn, her laptop, multiple fully charged phones, and a small portable internet hotspot testament to her readiness. She'd already posted a preemptive message on the Boston Community Voice blog and several social media platforms. Standby, potential forced eviction and demolition of horse sanctuary imminent. We will be going live if authorities proceed. Lucinda, dressed in her most durable work clothes, moved through the barn, her movements slow and deliberate, trying to project a calm she didn't feel for the sake of the horses. She gave each one a little extra feed, a longer scratch, a whispered promise. I'm here. I won't leave you. Samson nudged her hand, his dark eyes full of an almost human understanding. At precisely 8:57 a.m., 3 minutes before the 72-hour deadline expired, the low rumble began. It started as a vibration in the ground, then grew into the unmistakable growl of heavy machinery. Lucinda's heart leaped into her throat. Phoebe, already positioned near the fence line with a clear view of the access road and the barn, confirmed it. They're here, Lucinda, and they've brought the bulldozer. A large, bright yellow bulldozer, looking obscenely out of place in the tranquil setting, crawled into view, followed by a flatbed truck carrying several grim-faced men in hard hats and work vests. Greg Davis's sleek SUV pulled up behind them, and he emerged, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He carried a bullhorn. Ms. Evans Davis's amplified voice boomed across the property. Your time is up. We are here to enforce the HOA bylaws and remove this illegal structure. You have 10 minutes to vacate the barn and secure your animals. After that, we will commence demolition. Phoebe was already live, her phone steadily broadcasting. This is Phoebe Chen reporting live from Chestnut Hill, where the Homeowners Association, led by Greg Davis, is preparing to demolish a horse rescue sanctuary. She narrated, her voice remarkably composed despite the tension. She panned the camera from the approaching bulldozer to Lucinda, who stood defiantly before the main barn door, her arms crossed. Lucinda took a deep breath. This was it. Phoebe, make sure they see everything, she said, her voice tight. As the bulldozer idled, its engine a threatening throb, Lucinda addressed Davis, her voice clear and carrying, though unamplified. Greg, these aren't just structures and bylaws you're destroying. These are lives. These horses have nowhere else to go. This is the only facility in the Boston area equipped to handle severe rescue cases. Davis raised his bullhorn again. Sentimental appeals won't work. Evans, you had your warning. This is about upholding community standards. He gestured to the men from the flatbed truck. All right, boys, if she won't move them, you'll have to, gently, if possible. We don't want any unnecessary complications. The thought of those strangers trying to handle her traumatized horses, animals who only trusted her, sent a fresh wave of cold dread through Lucinda. Some of her horses, if approached by unfamiliar men, especially under duress, could panic, injure themselves, or become defensive. You will not touch my horses, Lucinda declared, her voice ringing with authority. She stepped forward, positioning herself directly in the bulldozer's path, should it attempt to advance. Phoebe's camera zoomed in on Lucinda's face, then panned to show the imposing machine. We are witnessing a standoff, Phoebe reported. Lucinda Evans, a former Hurricane Katrina rescuer, is now shielding her rescued horses with her own body. The live feed numbers were climbing rapidly. Phoebe gave a running commentary, reading out some of the comments flooding in. Viewers are expressing outrage. This is monstrous. Someone stop them. Where is the city council, the mayor? A hidden truth, one Lucinda hadn't fully weaponized until this critical moment, began to surface in her mind. It wasn't just that her barn was a sanctuary, it was why it was so unique, and why its destruction would be an irreplaceable loss, not just to her, but to the wider community. Greg, Lucinda shouted, her voice raw with emotion. Ensuring Phoebe's microphone picked it up, you talk about community standards. For 15 years, this barn, this so-called eyesore, has been the only place animal control, even police departments from 3 counties, could bring horses they seized in cruelty cases when no other shelter had room or the expertise we've taken in the ones left to starve. The ones beaten, the ones too broken for anyone else to bother with. Close this place down, and you're condemning those animals. Is that the community standard you're so proud of? This revelation, broadcast live, hit with palpable force. Phoebe's viewership spiked again. The comments section turned into a furious torrent against the HOA. Even some of the previously pro-HOA comments seemed to waver. Greg Davis, who had looked so confident moments before, now appeared flustered. He hadn't counted on this level of public scrutiny, nor this specific detail being aired so dramatically. He looked towards the bulldozer operator, then back at Lucinda, his face reddening. That's an unsubstantiated claim. Evans, he stammered into the bullhorn, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Is it? Greg, Lucinda challenged. Phoebe, I have records, vet reports, letters from law enforcement thanking me. It's all documented. She looked directly into Phoebe's camera. This isn't just my fight. This is a fight for the soul of this community. Do we protect the vulnerable, or do we crush them under the wheels of so-called progress and inflated property values? The power dynamic had subtly but significantly shifted. The HOA men with the hard hats looked uneasy, glancing at each other, then at Davis. The bulldozer operator had cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension. The only sounds were Phoebe's steady reporting, the distant wail of a siren, perhaps unrelated, perhaps not, and the increasingly frantic clicks of keyboards from viewers spreading the word. Lucinda stood her ground, no longer just a defiant homeowner, but the voice for a cause much larger than her own small piece of land. The live stream was no longer just a broadcast. It was a digital uprising. The silence that followed Lucinda's impassioned declaration was profound, broken only by Phoebe's hushed, continuous narration into her phone. The distant siren grew louder, resolving into the distinct sounds of approaching police cruisers. Greg Davis's face, already flushed, turned a deeper shade of crimson. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, the bullhorn hanging uselessly by his side. The tide had turned, not with a roar, but with the undeniable weight of truth broadcast to thousands. 2 police cars and a vehicle from Boston Animal Control pulled up, lights flashing. An officer, Sergeant Miller, a man whose weary face showed he'd seen his share of neighborhood disputes, approached, his expression serious. He'd been alerted by a flood of calls to the precinct, all referencing the live feed. Mr. Davis? Ma'am, Sergeant Miller addressed them both, his gaze lingering on the silent bulldozer. We've had multiple reports concerning this situation. I think it's best if everyone takes a step back for a moment. He turned to Davis. Given the public safety concerns and the claims being made about the unique nature of this facility, I'm advising you to halt any demolition activity pending a further review by city officials and animal welfare TOMO. Davis spluttered. Officer, we have a legal demolition order. The HOA is acting within its rights. That may be so. Mr. Davis, Miller replied calmly, but new information has come to light which requires verification. Specifically, claims regarding this facility's role with seized animals. If true, its sudden destruction without a viable alternative could indeed create a significant animal welfare crisis for the city. Councilwoman Rodriguez is already on her way here. The mention of Councilwoman Rodriguez, a known animal advocate with considerable influence in the city council, seemed to deflate Davis completely. His fight was no longer with a lone woman and her horses, but with the growing outrage of the public and now, potentially, the city administration itself. The men in hard hats began to subtly distance themselves from him, packing up their tools with a newfound urgency. The bulldozer operator, looking relieved, climbed down from his cab. Phoebe, still broadcasting, captured every moment Davis's crumbling composure, the arrival of the authorities, the palpable relief on Lucinda's face. Her live stream had become a sensation, shared across news sites and social media. The hashtag Stand With Lucinda's Horses trending locally and beginning to pick up national traction. Councilwoman Rodriguez arrived shortly thereafter, a whirlwind of focused energy. She listened intently to Lucinda, her expression growing more concerned as Lucinda detailed the types of animals she cared for and showed her the documentation she'd mentioned, letters of commendation from overwhelmed rural sheriff's departments, thank you notes from animal control officers who had nowhere else to turn. She then turned a steely gaze on Greg Davis. The next few hours were a blur of official discussions, legal consultations, and media frenzy. Phoebe's initial live stream had drawn other news crews, and Lucinda's quiet sanctuary was suddenly the focal point of intense public interest. The resolution, when it came, was decisive. The city, facing overwhelming public pressure and the clear evidence of the sanctuary's vital role, intervened. An emergency council meeting was convened, and a temporary moratorium was placed on the HOA's demolition order, specifically citing the public service rendered by Lucinda's facility. Furthermore, an investigation was launched into the HOA's rezoning practices and their handling of the dispute. The hero's rise was swift and unexpected for Lucinda. Donations began pouring in from across the country, viewers moved by her story and her unwavering courage. Volunteers offered their time and skills. Pro bono legal firms stepped forward, not just to defend her against the HOA, but to help her secure the sanctuary's future, perhaps through a special zoning variance or by establishing it as a nonprofit with city recognition. For Greg Davis and the Chestnut Hill HOA, the fall was equally dramatic. The investigation uncovered irregularities in the rezoning process, including insufficient notification to affected residents like Lucinda. Davis's aggressive tactics, broadcast live for all to see, painted the HOA as a callous, overreaching entity. He was swiftly voted out of his position by irate HOA members, many of whom had been unaware of the full extent of his campaign against Lucinda or the critical role her sanctuary played. The HOA itself faced a massive public relations nightmare and was ultimately compelled not only to rescind all actions against Lucinda, but also to issue a public apology. The lawsuit Lucinda had initially feared she couldn't win turned into a countersuit, with overwhelming evidence of harassment, misrepresentation by the HOA, and the demonstrable public service her sanctuary provided. The HOA settled out of court. The compensation was substantial, more than enough to cover her legal fees, make necessary upgrades to the barn, and establish an emergency fund for the animals. It was a figure in the hundreds of thousands, a clear vindication. Months later, Lucinda stood in her paddock, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow. The barn, once threatened, now stood stronger than ever. A fresh coat of paint on its weathered boards, a new, larger run-in shed funded by donations. Samson, Goliath, and Delilah grazed peacefully nearby, along with several new arrivals, horses who, without her sanctuary, would have had no second chance. Phoebe was there, no longer just a reporter, but a friend, working on a follow-up piece about the positive impact of community action. "You did it, Lucinda," Phoebe said, smiling. "You saved them all." Lucinda watched her horses, a deep sense of peace settling over her. The fight had been brutal, pushing her to her limits, but it had revealed a strength she hadn't known she possessed and a community support she had never anticipated. The metallic tang of fear and officialdom had been replaced by the sweet scent of hay and the comforting presence of her animals. "We did it," Lucinda corrected, her gaze sweeping over the peaceful scene. "It took everyone. It showed that when people see the truth, they'll stand up for what's right." She reached out, and Samson ambled over, resting his head gently against her shoulder. The battle was over. The sanctuary was safe, and the silence of the evening was filled only with the contented sounds of rescued lives. Her past as a rescuer in the face of nature's fury had found its parallel in her victory over human indifference and greed, proving that the courage to protect the vulnerable was a force more powerful than any bulldozer. Lucinda's unwavering courage in the face of a heartless HOA not only saved her beloved horse sanctuary but also exposed a system that prioritized profit over compassion. Her fight reminds us of the power of one voice against injustice. Thank you for watching and sharing her incredible journey. Please subscribe, like, and comment with your thoughts below on this inspiring story of resilience.